Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I ask you to please take your seats? Welcome to today's debate on the Global Plastics Treaty. It's good to see that so many have made their way to our backyard. My name is Lars Stordal. I work for GRID-Arendal. Our office is just here, and I'll be your moderator today. If you haven't noticed, our backyard has become one of the, or maybe the go-to place for debates and discussions on the health and sustainability of our natural environment. But we really felt that this year's program would be incomplete without a deeper look at one of the most prominent global negotiation processes that are taking place at the moment, literally as we speak. Namely the so-called INC process, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. Plastic pollution is perhaps one of the most visible and disturbing environmental problems of our time. Many of us will have seen photos of birds entangled in fishing gear or of animals with plastics in their stomachs. There are also less visible but still very problematic aspects of this problem, such as microplastics, the use of hazardous chemicals, and the fact that plastic production emits greenhouse gases. Or as noted in the UN Environment Assembly resolution that set in motion the negotiation for the Plastics Treaty. And I quote, "The high and rapidly increasing levels of plastic pollution represent a serious environmental problem at the global scale, negatively impacting environmental, social, and economic dimensions of sustainable development." That may be a very broad statement, but the fact that all UN member states have agreed to it represents an acknowledgement of the urgent need to address this scourge. And in fact, the same resolution sets out the goal of a new treaty to end plastic pollution. It's not a small task to negotiate a global treaty, and arguably ending plastic pollution is easier said than done. The INC has now met 4 times, and only one meeting of 7 days remain and will be held in Busan, Korea this November, assuming we follow the current timeline. Progress has been slow, painfully slow, some would say, and consensus mostly absent from the glance of it. But today we would like to understand what's really going on and try to break down the process and highlight the challenges and opportunities ahead. So let's get started. However, before I introduce our panelists, I would like to show you a short video that GRID-Arendal helped produce for the High Ambition Coalition led by Norway and Rwanda. This, of course, is not a High Ambition Coalition meeting, but we take the liberty to help with some promotion and provide some context to the first part of this debate. Can I have the video?
The world is facing a plastic pollution crisis. Plastic consumption and production have reached unsustainable levels, with plastic consumption quadrupling over the past 30 years. Primary plastics, such as nurdles, are available in abundance at a low cost for manufacturers of plastic products, and the amount of primary plastic available is expected to triple by 2060. Only a small fraction of new plastic products are produced from recycled content due to poor quality, lack of availability, and high costs. The production of primary plastic polymers relies heavily on fossil-based sources, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Without action, plastic consumption and plastic waste are also projected to nearly triple by 2060. Even though we can recycle some plastic waste, today we only recycle 9%. Our waste management and recycling systems cannot handle current levels of plastic waste, let alone future growth. The High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution is committed to developing an ambitious international, legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution by 2040. The Plastics Treaty should require countries to take effective measures to restrain the production of primary plastic polymers within a set time frame and to stimulate a market for secondary plastics. These could include administrative measures, bans, removal of subsidies, and regulations. Parties should agree on robust and comprehensive minimum reporting requirements for plastic polymer production and chemical additives used in the production. Let's end plastic pollution by 2040.
So let me now introduce our panelists today and ask them to come up to the stage. Maria Varteserian from the Labour Party, State Secretary, Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Heidi Savelli Söderberg, Head of the Source to Sea Pollution Unit, Ecosystems Division of the UN Environment Programme. And Magnus Løvold, Advisor, Norwegian Academy of International Law. Okay. So the video said it all, or at least gave a relatively clear context. Without action, the amount of plastic and the primary plastic available is expected to triple by 2060. And we recycle very little, and waste management systems are unable to cope even with the current levels. Clearly, plastic production must be addressed in the new treaty. Yet it remains perhaps the most contentious issue, or one of the most contentious issues of all. So my first question goes to Magnus. There is a concrete proposal on the table that has been made by two high ambition coalition members, Peru and Rwanda, with regards to a global plastic reduction target. Can you help us unpack this proposal a bit and perhaps explain what is the state of play with regards to achieving consensus around the need to curb the production of primary plastics? It's a long question, but over to you.
Thanks for that, Lars. And I can certainly try. And I just want to say right off the bat that I'm really an optimist at heart. I really do believe that we can get good outcomes out of these multilateral processes. And it's just that maybe some of the stuff that I'm going to say in response to your question maybe seem a little bit negative. So I just want to make sure that you remember that I do remain hopeful at heart.
Noted.
The proposal that you mentioned is quite straightforward, really, on paper. It's a proposal made by two countries, Peru and Rwanda, to basically have all the members, all the parties to this treaty, reduce production and consumption of primary plastic polymers by 40% by 2040. So that's the proposal. They also suggest a reporting framework to go along with this commitment to track progress. And this is one of the many sort of concrete proposals for treaty measures that have been made, and you see now we're approaching the end of the process. You see these proposals becoming more and more specific and more concrete as we sort of get to the grand finale of the process at the end of INC 5, their last negotiation session in Busan, South Korea, later this year. And these other proposals, I just want to mention that includes more discrete proposals for a prohibition on problematic plastic products, for instance, and also phase-out obligations for specific chemicals of concern that Norway, for instance, have played a very constructive role in promoting that and elaborating that concept. But to address your second question, and this is where I get maybe a little bit, maybe perceived as being a little bit negative, how likely is it that this is sort of, that we managed to get this adopted, the reduction target adopted in December? And I think, like, just overall, we have to be clear that the process, the negotiation process so far, has been a little bit of a mess. And we can talk about that, but it's just one indication. The current text that they are negotiating after 4 sessions, and they have produced this outcome document, is currently at 77 pages. And I think more worryingly, it contains 3,700 square brackets, meaning that this takes place in brackets that has not been agreed, like 3,700. We have 7 more days to negotiate, and it is a little bit hard to see how this will be resolved. And I think on top of this, as I think you mentioned, there is also some issues related to the decision-making in this process. There is actually no clarity on how the committee will make its decision. So when you have all these points of negotiations that have been unresolved and you have no clarity on the decision-making rule, obviously it becomes very hard to get agreement. I think on top of this, there are some specific challenges to the Peru-Rwanda proposal. It has received significant backing from the High Ambition Coalition that you mentioned here. There was a declaration issued at the end of the INC4 in Ottawa, Bridge to Busan declaration. We have a lot of scientific evidence and reports very clearly saying that if you're going to deal with the problem of plastic pollution, you have to reduce production. But at the same time, I think it will be an uphill struggle to get this adopted. And again, I'm saying I'm normally an optimist, but there is a sizable group of countries that remain very hostile to this suggestion of including a reduction target. And some of them are even opposed to even talking about the production of primary plastic polymers within the context of this treaty. As China, for instance, a country, have said repeatedly, they say polymers are not pollution. They don't want to talk about it. Maybe that's just a little bit negative, and I hope that later in discussion I can become a little bit more optimistic, because I do remain hopeful, and I also know that in these processes things can change really, really rapidly. It will get difficult, but it's possible to change it. And I think that the fight at the moment is to maintain the production of primary plastic polymers within the scope of the discussion. And then I also think that it's important when we talk about that when we talk, not sort of, if we don't get concrete targets on primary plastic polymers, that we still fight to maintain those other measures that enjoy actually larger support, such as a prohibition on problematic plastics, phase out of chemicals of concern, and that we don't throw those out with a wastewater, so to speak.
Bathwater.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much, Magnus. Maria, I mean, I invite you to give your reflections on that, but and maybe also on the broader sort of strategy seen from Norway's side. But if you, I mean, addressing plastic reduction, the plastic reduction target, what is Norway's view on that, and how realistic do you see this proposal?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I just have to start off by saying it is as realistic as we allow it to be. And I was in Nairobi 2 years ago at the NEA 5.2. During those days and hours, the war in Ukraine broke out. So when we arrived to Nairobi, it was very... we were kind of... uncertain where it would take us, this whole process, and Norway was chairing the whole meeting. And what we saw that despite all the differences, despite all the temperature in the room and people leaving the room, and it was challenging, we managed to agree on some standards. We managed to agree on some ambition. The will was there. And fast forward to today, where we're standing right now, we will need to make sure that the meeting in November is a success. And I want to present some hope. I agree with everything you said. And I'm also an optimist, but also a realist. But we need to address this issue in that way, because what the situation for the plastic negotiations right now, it resembles very much where we have been previously with climate and with nature negotiations as well. And not to talk too much about that, but in Montreal, prior to the CBD COP15, where nature got its Paris moment, there was also a lot of text with brackets, several thousand brackets. But we still managed to agree, to clear the text, to agree on a text, a quite ambitious one, and one that nature needs. So what is important now is really to pinpoint when we get to the crunch time of the negotiations, when the politicians get engaged, when all of the skillful bureaucrats have done their job and said that we cannot go any further, so it's up to you now to remove these brackets, we need to have a strategy, a proper one, from a political side. And from the Norwegian side, when you ask me about what is our strategy, well, it is the fact that we have to go all in. We have to go to the lengths which the seriousness of the situation is demanding from us. We need an ambition, as ambitious as possible, agreement to end plastic pollution, because it is the most visible environmental threat to our very existence on this planet. And if we do not show the world that we are able to tackle it, I mean, why do we sit in the positions we have right now? So it's our most important priority from the Norwegian government side on the environmental tracks we work along, to make sure that we have a legally binding agreement resembling the Minamata protocol, making sure that when we get to crunch time, we use it as well as possible.
Very good, thanks. On this proposal by Peru and Rwanda, do you want to? Of Norway is of course members of the High Ambition Coalition, not just members, but you are co-chairing it.
Co-chairing it, of course, supporting it.
Fully behind, yeah.
Yes.
We will. I think Magnus, you can also share on similarities with other conventions. We can come back to that a bit later. But when it comes to sort of this whole unified approach and the need to address the full life cycle of plastic, that is of course obvious. But why? I mean, over to Heidi. I know you cannot comment so much on the negotiation side, given UNEP's position, but why is it so important to have a life cycle approach?
Thank you for that question. And I think you touched on it in the beginning also, because governments came together and agreed to Resolution 514 2 years ago. And they agreed that it should be based on a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastics. So that's what governments have set out as the guiding beacon, so to speak. And this is then an important thing to consider. If you look at the life cycle approach, is to look at the entire life of a product or a service that related to plastics, and also to consider what type of impacts this product or service can have from the beginning to the end, and when making decisions, considering the impacts, be they around climate, ecosystems, economy, toxicity, or jobs, that the decisions are not made in a vacuum, that they are considering the full life cycle, and that then both the selection of best solutions can be guided by taking this into consideration, and also that potential trade-offs are not kind of put into jeopardy. So if you make a decision where you're considering only the environment, there might be socioeconomic impacts that have not been factored in. So this holistic approach is quite essential, and which governments have recognized in the Resolution 514, to try and solve the problem instead of a piecemeal approach, where you might only look at waste management or product design or so. It takes a lot to pull this together in the end.
Yes, you have to have measures at all the during all the sort of phases of the life cycle. Yeah, Magnus, where do we stand on sort of this? A consensus around a holistic approach. I mean, plastic production is one very important aspect of it, but how achievable is a holistic agreement at this point, do you think?
That's a good question. I think it depends a little bit what you mean by holistic and comprehensive agreement. I think, as you know, it's absolutely true that the negotiation mandate that was adopted in 2022, that stipulates a holistic agreement. I mean, a treaty that, with measures along the entire life cycle of plastics, right? So that is what is in the negotiation mandate. Now, we have seen throughout the process that there have been some significant attempt at narrowing the scope of the treaty, and in a sense, that's natural. A negotiation mandate is broad. It sets out some overarching goals for the process, but then it's up to the committee to try to pin down exactly what it will be in practice, right? And we have seen, from certain countries, and particularly countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia, other members of this Gulf Cooperation Council, that they have, and other countries in the Middle East, oil-producing countries, plastic-producing countries, that they have been, like, from day one, really, the first negotiation session, that we need to have a discussion about scope, and they want to limit the scope. So there have been attempts at doing that. And I have to say, like, I mean, and what is what, right? I mean, who has succeeded so far? Who is leading the, I mean, it's hard to tell. It's super messy process, but one indication that we do have, and this is actually one of the very few substantive decisions that the committee has made, and that was on the, it's a little bit technical, on the mandate for so-called intersessional work between the meeting in Canada in April and the next meeting in South Korea in November. They agreed, okay, we're gonna meet now, and we're gonna look at some of the technical aspects of these provisions that have been proposed for this treaty, and we're going to try to spell them out. We need sort of more technical input, which makes total sense, right? You need to know what exactly are you talking about. And that mandate, that was debated since the second negotiation session. They failed to agree on a mandate for that work in the third round of negotiation. And then at the last one now in Ottawa, they did agree, but they agreed only to talk about products, so problematic products, chemicals of concern, so certain chemicals, not all plastic chemicals, and product design requirements in the core provisions. And then in addition to that, they wanted to have an expert discussion on finance. That was what they were able to agree. And this part about production of primary plastic polymers, that did not make the cut. That was cut out, and this was to, Peru and Rwanda and certain countries' great frustration. So this was a decision made. Now, this doesn't mean that this is going to be the scope at the end, because nothing has been adopted and nothing has been agreed until everything has been agreed. But it does, for an observer like me, an observer to this process, it does give an indication that maybe some of these countries that have promoted production cuts, maybe they're willing to go along with the consensus of a smaller scope of the treaty. That's what I'm concluding, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
Maria, do you want to come in on that?
No.
Are you willing to trade production for chemicals?
If we don't have an answer which makes sense for countries with the large petrochemical industry, we're not going to get anywhere. At the same time, it's a trade-off, really. How ambitious of an agreement do we want versus how many do we want to include, right? Based on having participated in a few negotiation processes, not that many, but still, Glasgow COP26 was quite interesting, also COP15, so that if you start kind of too low or try and compromise too early in the process, you will only get lower. And Norway, from our perspective, as a co-chair of the High Ambition Coalition together with Rwanda, we want to see the agreement. We want to aim high and stay as high as possible, and then see where we need to land for it to make sense. And then, once again, when we get to the crunch time, to see what are the meaningful trade-offs. I think that a holistic approach, a true one, must make sense in each and every step along the value chain. From production to all of the whole, we talked about system in the previous debate we participated in. It's the system that needs to change. It's not the plastics problem. It's the fact that we use plastic, a product which is produced and can last for almost a lifetime, for only one time, and then we throw it out, throw it away, or do not dispose of it in the way we should, and then it ends up in nature, staying there for eternity. So from production to if it's possible to recycle it, then recycling. If it's not possible to recycle it, well, try and use it perhaps for concrete industry to replace coal. That's also possible. It will reduce emissions and pollution. We need to think creatively to make sure that we get the broad value chain. Otherwise, it will not make sense. And I think personally, and also based on the insight of the Norwegian priorities in the upcoming crunch time of the negotiations, I mean, we need to aim high. Otherwise, it will just become something that we cannot be as proud of as we can.
I think that is music to some of our ears. Very good. Yes, Magnus, I'm going to ask you a question which is not in the script, perhaps, but are there what other treaty processes can we learn from here? I know that we've had some discussions about the ozone, how that was addressed. But then there's, on the other hand of the scale, there's the Paris Agreement, and I think many of us will agree that that is perhaps not serving the planet as it should. So, and these are very different kinds of agreements. Yeah, can you?
It's a really good question, and I think we have a lot to learn from other agreements. And I think we also have to recognize that every treaty-making process is unique, and it is about creating something new. So looking too much to precedent and looking too much to the past, I think, can be a mistake sometimes. And I mean, these processes, they don't happen that often, these big multilateral treaty negotiations. And what is happening in this process will itself set a precedent for future treaty-making processes. Like, what is possible? It's going to sort of show sort of the scope of what is possible to achieve on, in multilateral diplomacy in the future. But I do think maybe to mention a few, and to build upon that comment you made about trade-off between participation and ambition, right? That you do have one model, like you mentioned, the Montreal Protocol on the ozone layer, that was negotiated in the 80s, right? So it's a long time ago, and it's, we should be very careful about learning lessons from that. But that was negotiated by a fairly small group of countries, including some, major producers of CFC gases. But it wasn't an inclusive process. Not everybody took part. But then it had some very clear obligations in terms of the content, very clear rules about what needed to be done to reduce the production of this, and that was possible, I think, partly because it was negotiated by a small group. And then, after it was adopted, then you worked to universalize the treaty, and now I think that the Montreal Protocol is, it's a nearly universal membership. So that happens afterwards. States sign on, saying, this is in our interest too, so they sign on to it afterwards. I think on the other side, you mentioned the Paris Agreement, maybe a comment on that. I think that is from my perspective, a little bit critical maybe, but that is a lowest common denominator approach to a treaty. And what it is based mainly, not only, but mainly on voluntary contributions from individual members to the treaty. It's a little bit like, I would characterize it almost like the Norwegian word dugnad, a dugnad treaty. And I'm just
look out the window
exactly.
And wait for people
and
to.
I'm not entirely sure if I would trust a question as important as climate change or plastic pollution to, Frode in Side om Side. Yeah, and when he goes to dugnad and how he tries to, cheat and I wouldn't trust it to that kind of mechanism. I do think that we need stronger rules and clearer obligations, and I think that finding that right balance, I think, is the critical challenge in the run-up to these negotiations. You want a broad membership, you want a credible majority, but you also want, I think, some clear sort of rules of the road, and that's what international law is all about, is setting those rules.
We need to get the snowball rolling, basically. And I'm just thinking about working with foreign policy every day and thinking about the big picture and also how it affects the small processes, or not small, but more detailed. And where was the world in the 80s? When we got to Montreal. It was before the Berlin Wall fell down, so it was quite cold. It was a Cold War. And what does the world look like today? Well, it's quite cold as well in terms of geopolitical relations and belief in the multilateral system. What my boss, Espen Barth Eide, who was at this stage in the seminar just before this one, said, and I don't agree with him only because he's my boss, but this is actually a very good point. In a world which collaborates less, a multilateral system is under pressure, where there is a great power rivalry, especially between United States and China, there are actually some beacons of hope, of light, and that is environmental negotiations, because it goes actually the opposite way. At COP28 in Dubai, we saw that it gathered more world leaders than the previous UNGA, the United General Assembly in New York. And the fact that we managed to agree at COP28 on a clear language for the first time using fossil fuels and transitioning away in a just and orderly manner, I mean, it means something. There are some resemblances, and history never repeats itself. We know that, but it rhymes, right? So we need to think about, okay, how can we use this process to kind of build up on this hope that we really, really need?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's possible. I truly do.
I want to bring in Heidi on this because I mean, a lot of countries are already doing things to end plastic pollution, and they of course participate in the negotiations as well. But and UNEP is a close partner on also not only on negotiations but on support to sort of, let's say, early preparedness. So what are some of the key areas that you are hearing in terms of where do they need more support? What are they looking for at this time?
Thank you. I think for many countries, they don't have a full overview of their plastics situation. Like they don't know necessarily how much is imported, exported, produced, going out into the environment. And they are looking to understand that better, because that can also influence the level of commitment that they might feel comfortable taking or making in any kind of setting. So we've been working with first 18 countries plus another 5 to develop inventories of plastics, so source inventories, where are the flows across the economy and the ecosystems as well. Many countries also have some challenges on knowledge management or data management, and this varies between countries and regions. So we're also establishing this digital platform where it's possible to provide the support needed to use flexible approaches of measuring this type of information. Looking ahead, it's how do you also measure it in a way that you can compare between countries, because that's lacking in many ways. So agreeing on the type of data to be collected and how it's collected, working with statistics offices. They are the ones who eventually will be looking at measuring progress at national level or contributing information. So we're developing statistical guidelines on that. Another project is around the GEF integrated program, working with 15 countries, and developing projects more specifically looking at product packaging and so on, together with WWF and UNEP. But we are getting a lot of requests from countries that want additional support, more than the 18 that we can provide for right now, the 19, more than the 15 that we're working on. So these are some of the areas. In terms of knowledge, we're also seeing kind of a desire to better see what our opportunities there might be around product design, around reuse systems, around EPR, and also around inventories of the legislative situation. So where are there opportunities instead of starting from scratch, developing potentially new legislation? What are options that are available within a country for them to consider? And all of this is in parallel with the negotiations, but just a few examples on the work we're doing, but also that we're hearing kind of call for more support also.
Call for more support, yeah. Norway, of course, has a new phase of the aid program on marine litter and microplastics. So, can you say a bit about how you are engaging with what are the? I know you cannot say much about the future, but how can Norway play a role, let's say, also on aspects of early preparedness and so on?
That's a very good question, and we're currently in the process of evaluating the previous period of the aid program, and before starting on the next or the continuation of it. And we have agreed that 1 billion Norwegian kroners over a period of 4 years, and specifically, well, we're evaluating first, but we already know that we didn't involve private sector businesses well enough last time, so we need to do more, because that's kind of, I think that's part of the missing link to making sure we succeed. But at the same time, when we have the data, we have the structure, we know what to do. And we have the High Ambition Coalition, which we can say is coalition of the willing. And there are many companies also who know that if they want to sell their products to the high-end markets, markets such as the European one, they will need to show their numbers based on environmental impact. And perhaps those companies are in countries which are, at this point, are not quite ready to join in on the highest ambition, but they will be. So someone just needs to start. Like you made a very good point about that. I completely agree. And so the next period of the Norwegian aid will basically, we have to, it's, I don't know, in lack of a better way of saying it, it's putting our money where our mouth is. And also together with the actors, everyone who has been involved in the previous period and everyone who is willing to contribute to the next with their skills and know-how and resources, tell us, well, where are the gaps along, once again, this whole holistic approach, this value chain approach we need to fill in order to actually go from the linear to the circular, which we need to do. So yeah, that's the ambition, at least for the next period of the aid, and it's all very much connected to the political ambition. But the will is there.
Thanks so much. I don't know if you want to
No, I
react to
think
that now.
lots to do, so
Lots
to
to
speak,
do.
looking
Yeah,
at.
yeah. I think we have time for sort of just a final round, like 2 minutes each, perhaps, and I'm going to ask you kind of a targeted question. So, Maria, looking at the next few months, what do you see as the most important ingredients to kind of help with the final push?
The most important ingredients is the political will and our ambition to scale it up, to speed it up, to broaden it out, to involve as many state actors, as many private actors as we can in making this happen. And I truly believe it is possible, because I see that the mega trends with environment and climate kind of being the positively odd man out in an otherwise quite dark, geopolitically dark backdrop. So that's possible. And if we're going to the roots of all of this, looking at how modern economies develop, taking too much of resources for free from nature and leaving too much of the bad stuff we didn't want, either if it's pollution or if it's emission to the atmosphere, setting that negativity to the amount of zero in terms of what it costs to do those things. That's the very area where we need to go in and say we need to change it. We need to make it more expensive to do business as usual, than what we have done previously. We need to make it possible and cheaper and more economically viable to do it the right way. And what makes me an optimist, in addition to working with the ocean and green transition, I also work with the EU, European politics, and the High North. In the EU, if you look at the system there with the European Green Deal and everything which has been made through Fit for 55 and all of the programs, all of the directives, I mean, it has created a market where you have combined what is good for ecology and what is good for economy. So companies choosing the right thing right now environmentally are not necessarily doing it out of their good hearts. It's because it's what is giving them income. And that's the point where we need to get. So let's get started.
Yes. And then on to Heidi, and I'll give Magnus the last word.
Okay, well, I agree with your comments about the political will. I also think that the accessibility and transparency, accessibility to data and information is key, and thereby promoting transparency in how this is made available. Especially if we look at chemicals of concern, if we look at production data, these are things that are not necessarily at the moment easily available to anyone that would like to find that information. So I think that there is a lot of work to do in terms of filling those type of gaps and make data that is existing available, but also perhaps simplify. We have chemicals with 500 names. When you look at plastic moving across borders, through trade, through other ways, it's very difficult to regulate and keep track of that type of system. So I think that that's an important area too, where you can expand on information and transparency. Thank you.
Magnus, what is your prediction for where we will be? I think it's 1st of December is the last day.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, well, prediction is difficult, especially about the future. Isn't that what someone once said?
You can have 3 minutes instead of 2.
I want to say first that I completely agree with this point you're making, Maria, about the need for building and activating the political will. And this is also the reason why I'm an optimist, or I remain hopeful that we can get a good outcome from this process, it is the political will and the mobilization work that has been done over the past, several years in the run-up to the mandate, but also during, outside the sort of the formal negotiation sessions, but the work done by Norway and Rwanda in the High Ambition Coalition, which I find that's a real source of hope for me. I think there is work done. We have sort of many of the building blocks that we need for a successful outcome is there. There is a strong chair. There's a strong chair of the negotiations, and I think that's really significant. We just know from any other negotiation process, if you have a weak chair, you're not going to get anything important. If you have a strong chair, you have hope, and you have that in this process. An excellent, excellent chair. Then you have civil society as well, WWF, other organizations that is doing really amazing advocacy and communication work around the world, which we also know is really critical. So I think if everybody is sort of fully mobilized from now in the run-up to INC 5 in Busan in South Korea, I do think that it's possible to get a treaty or at least a sizable majority, a 2/3 majority of countries supporting a good, what I would call a good treaty with, that covers the full life cycle of plastics with discrete obligations on problematic products or harmful products, chemicals of concerns, maybe some more broader provisions on design requirements, on primary plastic polymer production, on EPR, waste management, cleanup. There's all these areas that need to be covered. You can't deal with all of them in the same detail. So I think we're looking at probably a bit of a hybrid treaty. We talk about the Montreal Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and I think this is going to be something a little bit in between. And I do think that this is possible to get through a credible majority behind such a treaty at INC 5. That is my hope. But I do think it really relies critically on those ambitious countries' ability to really put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and really push and mobilize from now in the run in the coming months. Yeah. I'm happy that I got to end on a positive note.
Well done.
Yeah. As someone said before, the best way to predict the future is to create it.
Yes.
So let's stay tuned and hope for the best. Hope for a good outcome for the planet. Thanks so much to the three of you for attending. Thanks to all of you for also attending. And stay tuned. We have more events in the backyard. And there's also a green mingle tonight. So
cool.
Come back for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good.